Gulf of Mexico, 220 miles south-southwest of Morgan City, Louisiana. A Coast Guard cutter running dark at 12 knots closed on a vessel showing no AIS signal and no registered transponder ping. The target had been stationary for 11 hours. Deck lights off. In the thermal imaging feed aboard the cutter, the hull glowed with the heat signature of a loaded cargo hold. The boarding team had 6 minutes before the target's crew would see them on radar. What those agents were about to seize was the final thread in a 9-month investigation involving 3 federal agencies, a $610 million sanctions evasion network, and a fuel receipt that a night shift harbormaster had flagged 6 months earlier on a routine Port Authority form she assumed no one would ever read. She was wrong. Someone read it. And when they did, a shadow tanker fleet operating across the Gulf of Mexico began coming apart, one invoice line at a time. The story does not start at sea. It starts in a marina office outside Galveston, Texas, on a Tuesday night in early May 2026, with a woman named Patricia Delgado and a number that did not add up. Delgado had worked as a harbor master at Pelican Basin Commercial Marina for 11 years. Her job involved processing vessel clearances, logging fuel transactions, and filing Port Authority documentation for the dozens of commercial craft that moved through the facility each week. Administrative work, precise, repetitive, and largely invisible to anyone outside the Port Authority system. On the night of May 6, 2026, Delgado was processing a bunkering invoice for an offshore supply vessel called the Meridian Star. The vessel had departed Pelican Basin 2 days earlier, bound for a drilling platform in the Western Gulf. A declared voyage of approximately 340 nautical miles round trip. Standard run. Standard paperwork. Except the fuel invoice did not match the voyage log. The Meridian Star had billed for 84,000 gallons of marine gas oil. Delgado was not a fuel system specialist, but she understood distance and basic arithmetic. A vessel of that class, on a voyage of that declared length, consumed somewhere between 28,000 and 31,000 gallons under normal operating conditions. She had processed enough invoices for vessels of similar size to know the range. 84,000 gallons was not a rounding error. It was not a documentation mistake. It was 53,000 gallons more than the voyage required. She typed a single line in the Port Authority Anomaly Log MGO bunkering invoice Meridian Star May 4 departure quantity inconsistent with declared voyage parameters. Possible data entry error or misfiled invoice. Recommend verification. She filed it. She went home. She did not think about it again. The alert sat unread in a shared federal inbox for 6 days. Surveillance monitors on the dispatch center wall cycled through feeds. No one flagged the thread. On May 12, 2026, a Coast Guard Investigative Service liaison named Special Agent Daniel Okafor pulled the file during a routine audit sweep. Okafor was not looking for fuel discrepancies. He was cross-referencing vessel clearance records against a broader OFAC enforcement initiative tied to the Iran sanctions enforcement targeting expansion that Treasury had activated in March 2026. That expansion had flagged a pattern of flag-hopping tankers operating in the Gulf of Mexico corridor. Vessels that appeared to change registry every 4 to 6 months, while maintaining consistent route behavior. Okafor's audit was supposed to take 90 minutes. When he pulled the Meridian Star file, it took 3 days. The vessel was registered to a Belize-flagged holding company. Its declared operator was a Houston-based marine logistics broker called Gulf Vector Maritime Solutions. Gulf Vector had been incorporated in Harris County, Texas in November 2022. It listed 3 employees and a registered office address in a shared commercial suite on Westheimer Road. The company had filed $47.3 million in declared cargo brokerage revenue for calendar year 2025. HSI forensic photographers documented the office suite, 3 workstations, a single shared printer, evidence bags filling with hard drives. The physical footprint of an operation that had logged $47 million in revenue. That number could not exist in a legitimate brokerage of that size. Industry margins for marine cargo brokers ran between 2 and 5% of cargo value. Even at the top end, $47.3 million in revenue implied the company was moving nearly $1 billion in cargo annually. With 3 employees and no warehouse, no fleet, and no dock facilities of its own, Okafor flagged the Meridian Star file and escalated to his supervisor. By May 19, 2026, the investigation had a formal case designation, CGIS Case 2026-0447, jointly tasked with Homeland Security Investigations and Treasury's OFAC Enforcement Unit. The working title, assigned informally by the HSI case agent, was Operation Cormorant. What the 3 agencies found when they began pulling Gulf Vector's transaction history was not a small fuel billing irregularity. It was a transfer network, and it had been running for 14 months. The structure worked like this. Gulf Vector Maritime Solutions served as logistics coordinator for a fleet of 3 offshore supply vessels operating in the Gulf of Mexico, the Meridian Star, a second vessel registered as the Cabo Serrano, and a third called the Pelican Ridge. All three were nominally contracted to legitimate offshore energy clients. All three made regular fuel stops at commercial marinas along the Texas and Louisiana coast. The declared bunkering volumes at each stop were, without exception, significantly higher than voyage requirements. The excess fuel was not fuel. The excess billing covered transfer operations conducted 150 to 200 miles offshore, beyond routine Coast Guard patrol coverage, where the three vessels met a fourth ship, a Panamanian flagged tanker, called the Isla Dorada. The Isla Dorada did not appear in any U.S. port records. It had changed its AIS transponder identifier 4 times since January 2025. Its true operational history, assembled later through satellite imagery and OFAC database cross-referencing, showed a pattern of loitering in international waters southwest of the Louisiana coast at intervals of roughly 18 to 22 days. The Isla Dorada was a shadow tanker. Its cargo was Iranian-origin petroleum condensate, loaded via ship-to-ship transfer from vessels originating in the Persian Gulf. The condensate was remanifested during the transfer as Venezuelan blend crude, a reclassification accomplished through false cargo documentation prepared by shell entities spread across the Cayman Islands, Cyprus, and the United Arab Emirates. The 3 Gulf Vector supply vessels then transported the remanifested product to buyers in the Caribbean and West Africa, delivering it under documentation listing its origin as Venezuelan territorial waters. Federal agents pulled the final ledger from a seized hard drive, 14 months of wire transfers, shell invoices, and bunkering receipts totaling $610 million in sanctioned value moved without a single interdiction. Here is what strikes you when you read through this case carefully. The most sophisticated element of the operation was not the ship-to-ship transfer. It was not the flag hopping or the AIS manipulation. It was the fuel invoice. Using legitimate bunkering transactions at commercial U.S. marinas as the financial mechanism to compensate supply vessel crews and cover operational costs was operationally clean. The fake fuel charges were small enough, per transaction, to fall below standard audit thresholds. They created a paper trail that looked like normal commercial activity, and they had been working undetected for over a year. What is most surprising about this case is not the scale, it is the patience. 14 months of ship-to-ship transfers in international waters, and no one in the federal enforcement system had flagged it until a harbormaster in Galveston noticed a fuel receipt. The investigation moved through June and early July 2026 with significant operational complexity. CGIS, HSI, and OFAC had to build a case that could support federal prosecution without tipping off Gulf Vector or the Isla Dorada's crew. Any premature contact with the supply vessels would scatter the network. I went through the surveillance logs from this phase of the operation, and one detail kept recurring: the agents tracking the Isla Dorada could not confirm the vessel's position with precision until 3 weeks into active surveillance. The case file describes the ship as maintaining deliberate electromagnetic discipline, meaning it ran with its AIS transponder either off or transmitting false position data, and it avoided radio communication on monitored maritime channels during transfer operations. This is not standard behavior for a commercial tanker. Standard commercial tankers transmit continuously. The Isla Dorada behaved like a vessel that knew exactly what it was doing and why silence mattered. What the investigation had working in its favor was satellite imagery. OFAC and HSI obtained authorization to task a commercial satellite service with regular passes over the vessel's suspected operating area. Over 3 weeks, analysts identified 8 instances of the Isla Dorada in physical proximity to one of the 3 Gulf Vector supply vessels in international waters off Louisiana. Each proximity event correlated with a subsequent fuel bunkering invoice filed by one of the supply vessels at a Texas or Louisiana marina within 72 hours. Agents pulled the surveillance footage and wire transfer records side by side on the monitor wall. Every cash pickup caught on the hidden cameras corresponded to an outbound transfer logged the same day. The correlation was the mechanism, visible on screen in 2 columns of timestamps that never diverged. By July 3, 2026, the investigation had developed enough documentary evidence to support federal warrants. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Texas reviewed the case file and authorized a sealed indictment. The indictment named 11 individuals, including the principal operator of Gulf Vector Maritime Solutions, a man identified in court documents as Marcus Raines, age 49, a naturalized U.S. citizen who had previously worked in international shipping finance in Singapore and Dubai. Raines had founded Gulf Vector in November 2022. He held a legitimate U.S. maritime broker's license. His company had real clients and processed real transactions. The Iranian condensate network was embedded inside a functioning brokerage operation, which made it substantially harder to detect and substantially easier to explain away at any given checkpoint. One detail in the indictment reads almost like a procedural footnote but carries real operational weight. Raines had established a separate set of communication accounts on encrypted platforms that he accessed exclusively from a dedicated device purchased with cash in Dubai in 2023. That device never connected to any U.S. network. All operational communications related to the Isla Dorada network passed through it. The only reason investigators found it was because Rains carried it with him when he traveled. He kept it in his briefcase. When HSI agents executed a search warrant at his home in Bel Air, Texas on July 22, 2026, the device was not there. He had it with him. It was at Hobby Airport. Here is the part that looks strange on the surface, and then it doesn't. Rains had a one-way ticket to Dubai, departing at 9:15 a.m. on July 21. The search warrants were scheduled to execute simultaneously at 6 a.m. The timing gap was supposed to be enough. HSI had Rains under physical surveillance and had coordinated with CBP to flag his passport for secondary screening regardless of departure timing. The problem, at 5:47 a.m., the surveillance team monitoring Rains' residence reported he had left the house at 5:30 a.m., 30 minutes earlier than anticipated. He was already en route to the airport. The tactical teams executing the Westheimer Road office search and the residential warrant in Bel Air were not yet in position. The supervisor of the HSI tactical element made the call to advance the timeline on the airport intercept while holding the other teams at standby. Rains was detained at the International Departures Security Checkpoint at 58 a.m., 2 minutes before the teams at the other locations received the execute order. When agents executed the arrest, body camera footage captured what was in the briefcase, the device, a brick of mixed currency cash later counted at $43,000, and a second passport issued by a Caribbean nation in a different name, all photographed in place before the suspect was handcuffed and walked out. At 6:00 a.m. on July 21, 2026, federal teams executed simultaneous search warrants at 4 locations at the Gulf Vector office on Westheimer Road, a commercial storage yard in Pasadena, Texas, a second storage facility in La Marque, and a private residence in League City belonging to Gulf Vector's declared operations director, a woman named Sandra Cortez. Federal agents at the evidence collection scene bagged the last of the seized invoices and bunkering receipts. 14 months of transactions, stacked in labeled evidence boxes, the full architecture of the operation laid out under forensic photography lights. The Westheimer Road office looked completely ordinary from the outside. 3 desks, 2 monitors, a printer, a coffee maker, and a whiteboard with a vessel scheduling grid. Agents spent 6 hours processing the location. Behind a false panel in the server closet, they found 2 encrypted hard drives and a paper ledger. Handwritten, coded in a notation system that took HSI financial analysts 11 days to fully decode. The ledger documented 47 individual transfer operations over 14 months. Dates, vessel identifiers, cargo volumes in metric tons, payment routing codes for accounts in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands. It was the most complete operational record investigators could have hoped for. The Pasadena storage yard contained 12 binders of hard copy cargo documentation, bills of lading, inspection certificates, and customs declarations for cargo described as Venezuelan blend crude. All false, all professionally produced. The fabricated origin documentation bore the stamps of a Venezuelan Port Authority office that HSI later confirmed had been entirely invented, its stamps replicated using commercial printing equipment purchased through a third party in Panama. Think about the position of the HSI document analysts reviewing those binders. Every single piece of paper looked legitimate. The stamps, the signatures, the formatting, the paper stock. Only when you cross-referenced the documentation against actual Venezuelan export records did the discrepancy appear. The ships named as loading vessels in those documents had not been at the named Venezuelan terminals on the dates stated. Several of them had been in the Persian Gulf. The offshore seizure operation executed at 03:47 a.m. on July 21 in international waters 220 miles south of Morgan City. The Coast Guard cutter Resolute, operating under a federal warrant and coordinating with an HSI maritime tactical element aboard a second vessel, approached the Isla Dorada from the northwest. The target vessel was stationary. Thermal imaging confirmed at least 8 personnel on deck. The Isla Dorada was in the process of offloading cargo to a barge that had been flagged in surveillance imagery 3 days earlier. The boarding team went over the rail at 04:02 a.m. The Isla Dorada's crew offered no physical resistance. The barge crew, 4 individuals, was detained in place. Total personnel taken into custody at sea, 12, including the Isla Dorada's captain, a Greek national operating under a falsified Dominican Republic mariner's credential. Here is an unpopular opinion. The captain's sentence is going to be lighter than it should be. He will be the most cooperative defendant in this case. And cooperation agreements in federal maritime prosecutions almost always produce sentences that do not reflect the operational significance of the role. The man commanded the central node of a $610 million sanctions evasion network for over a year. Whatever he gets, it is unlikely to match what the scale of the operation warrants. The cargo aboard the Isla Dorada at the time of seizure, approximately 34,000 metric tons of petroleum condensate. OFAC analysts assessed its current market value at approximately $19.2 million. The condensate bore chemical signatures consistent with Iranian origin fields in the South Pars Formation. By 18:00 a.m. on July 21, 11 of the named defendants were in federal custody. The indictment unsealed that afternoon identified charges including conspiracy to violate the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, money laundering, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit sanctions evasion. The IEEPA charges alone carry potential sentences of up to 20 years per count. Sandra Cortez, the operations director detained at her League City residence, had attempted to destroy a laptop computer by submerging it in her backyard pool at some point during the 30 minutes between the airport intercept of Rains and the execution of the residential warrant. The laptop was recovered. HSI Digital Forensics later extracted partial data from the drive, including 2 years of email correspondence with the Cayman Islands shell entity that managed the transfer payment routing. The HSI case agent scrolled through the flagged correspondence on a surveillance monitor and stopped at a single email dated September 3, 2025. Cortez writing to the Cayman contact address describing a Texas Port Authority audit request as low risk, recommending no changes to the bunkering invoice structure. The agent marked the timestamp. She had been 8 months early with that assessment. She had been wrong. What this case tells us about how financial sanctions enforcement actually works is uncomfortable. A $610 million operation ran for 14 months inside U.S. territorial waters and adjacent international zones with documentation transiting U.S. port authorities. It was caught not by a surveillance algorithm, not by an OFAC database match, not by a border inspection. It was caught because one person with a steady attention to arithmetic noticed that a fuel receipt did not make sense and took 2 minutes to write a note about it. That is not a criticism of the agencies involved. It is an observation about the scale of the surveillance problem. The agencies doing this work are monitoring thousands of commercial maritime transactions at once. The operators exploiting the gaps know exactly where attention is concentrated and where it is not. Sandra Cortez, facing IEEPA conspiracy charges, entered a cooperation agreement with the U.S. Attorney's Office in early proceedings. The agreement, details of which were partially disclosed in a sealed supplement to the indictment, is expected to provide investigators with account information for at least 3 additional shell entities in jurisdictions not yet reached by the warrants. That information is still being processed. Marcus Rains entered a not guilty plea at arraignment and has retained private counsel with experience in international sanctions defense. His trial date has been set but is unlikely to proceed on schedule given the complexity of the documentary evidence. The Isla Dorada remains under federal seizure pending forfeiture proceedings. Its cargo has been transferred to a designated holding facility pending OFAC review. Will the shell entity network in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands be fully unwound? Comment yes or no below, because based on what has happened in comparable cases over the last decade, the answer is not obvious. 2 elements of the investigation remain formally open as of late July 2026. First, the Cayman Islands accounts. OFAC and DOJ have initiated mutual legal assistance treaty requests with the relevant jurisdictions, but AMLAT processes in offshore financial centers move at their own pace. The accounts identified through Cortez's cooperation contain transaction records implicating at least 2 additional parties who have not been charged. Their identities are known to investigators. Their location is not. Second, the barge. The barge present at the July 21 seizure site was registered to an entity in the Marshall Islands. Its 4 crew members are in federal custody, but the barge has a documented history of 9 prior offshore rendezvous over a period predating the formal Cormorant investigation window, suggesting the logistics infrastructure extended beyond the 14 months covered in the indictment. Those 9 prior operations are not accounted for in the current charge sheet. That cargo moved. Where it went, who received it, and what it was worth are questions the case has not yet answered. Patricia Delgado, the harbormaster at Pelican Basin Commercial Marina, was named in a footnote of the sealed indictment as the originating source of the anomaly flag that initiated the investigation. She was not a witness, not a cooperating source, not an informant. She was a Port Authority employee who noticed a math problem and documented it. A CGIS liaison was captured on body camera footage approaching her in late July, a brief exchange in a corridor, the agent delivering the case outcome, the subject offering no further comment before the footage cut. The Isla Dorada network is dismantled. The 11 defendants are in or moving toward federal proceedings. The condensate is in federal custody. The Cayman accounts are still open. 2 individuals named in the investigation's broader findings have not been located, and the 9 prior barge operations, the ones that predate the indictment window, represent cargo movements that exist in no federal charge document. That product reached buyers somewhere. Those transactions were paid for somewhere. That money is in the financial system. in jurisdictions that are not responding quickly to MLAT requests, and it is not coming back. The network that Patricia Delgado's fuel receipt helped dismantle processed $610 million in 14 months. The infrastructure that made it possible, the shell entities, the flag-hopping registry chain, the falsified port documentation, took years to build. It does not disappear with an indictment. If you want to follow what comes next in cases like this one, the sentencing developments, the asset forfeiture proceedings, the jurisdictions that do and don't cooperate, subscribe. The Cormorant case is not finished. And neither is the network it exposed.